This is no saga of heroes, no legend of noble sacrifice. This is a chronicle forged in the crucible of absolute despair. For humanity, cornered and facing oblivion, unearthed an ancient grim truth. Desperate times demand desperate measures. The Galactic Coalition, in their boundless arrogance, believed they understood the limits of defiance. They waged a war of extermination, confident in their overwhelming might. But they could not fathom the abyssal depths of human desperation, nor the terrifying lengths to which a species would go to survive. By the time they learned the true cost of awakening that primal, unyielding will, it was already too late. The gates of hell had opened, and humanity transformed into something far more monstrous than their oppressors. The Galactic Coalition, a sprawling bureaucracy composed of 23 ancient species and hundreds of junior members, had reached its final verdict on humanity. Their decree, delivered with the cold precision of galactic law, declared humanity unpredictable, violent, and most damningly, uncontrollable. Humans dared to question the coalition's wisdom, its methods, its very right to dictate the fate of the cosmos. Such insubordination, they reasoned, was a cancer that threatened the fragile peace of the galaxy. Eradication was the only cure, though the unspoken truth, a chilling whisper among the elder races, was simply that humanity refused to be subservient. Against a tide of hundreds of alien species' combined might, humanity's defenses crumbled. Within a year, every last human colony, once vibrant outposts of ingenuity and spirit, was scoured clean, reduced to smoking ruins and barren rock. The coalition forces, an unstoppable wave of alien warships and ground troops, finally descended upon Earth, the cradle of humanity. This was it, the final act. If Earth fell, humanity would become nothing more than a forgotten chapter in the coalition's annals, a cautionary tale of a species that dared to defy. But humanity, in its stubborn, defiant heart, refused to yield. For theirs was a legacy not of submission but of transformation. When cornered, they do not surrender. They evolve into the very thing you should have feared. And so Project Revenant was activated. Conceived long before the first shot was fired, when humanity sensed the storm building on the horizon, this clandestine initiative had been their final, unspoken contingency. A desperate gamble crafted in shadow, not in response to war, but in preparation for the moment peace would finally shatter. Thousands of soldiers, hardened veterans, engineers, and ordinary civilians, men and women alike, volunteered for the ultimate sacrifice, a final, defiant stand against extinction. They bid their farewells, whispered last words to loved ones, knowing that the people they were now were about to be erased, leaving behind only the cold, unfeeling machines of war they were destined to become. The genesis of the Revenants. The project began in earnest, deep beneath Earth's scorched crust, within mammoth subterranean complexes humming with grim purpose. Thousands of individuals lay suspended in gleaming capsules, undergoing a brutal, meticulously controlled metamorphosis. Metal was grafted onto bone, creating unyielding, resilient structures. Their blood was systematically drained, replaced by a synthetic oxygenated plasma that pulsed with an eerie metallic glow, enhancing endurance and repair. Muscle fibers were interwoven with nanites, amplifying strength to impossible levels, allowing punches that shattered plasteel and leaps that cleared buildings. Internal organs were radically re-engineered. Lungs processed synthetic plasma, and a streamlined digestive tract minimized the need for sustenance. Eyes became augmented optics, piercing darkness and processing data with chilling speed, while a neurochip integrated into the brain enabled impossible tactical calculations. The human nervous system was rewired, and pain, that fundamental human experience, was simply gone. To power this augmented physiology, the heart was fused with a compact, pulsing power core. Whatever they had once been was gone. Not by choice, not by design, simply lost. The sheer violence of the transformation, the chemical floods, the neural overclocking, the invasive augmentation had burned their identities to ash. Memories slipped away in the static. Names unraveled. Faces of loved ones blurred into forgotten silhouettes. What remained was not a man or woman, but a function. It was a directive, given flesh. When the capsules hissed open, revealing their occupants, it was not a birth, but a reforging. The men and women who emerged were no longer entirely human. Their skin was pale, almost translucent in places, stretched taut over newly defined musculature. Their eyes, though still reflecting a flicker of their former selves, held an unsettling, almost predatory gleam. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their every motion precise, devoid of the subtle imperfections of natural gait. They were stronger, faster, smarter, and utterly, terrifyingly emotionless in the face of their own physical trauma. They were the Revenants, humanity's last desperate answer to extinction, a living embodiment of the axiom: to fight monsters, one must become a monster. The whispers of fear and sorrow that had accompanied their transformation had been purged. Their minds were now tabula rasa, imprinted with a singular, unyielding directive: eradicate the enemy. They were fitted with their combat chassis, advanced suits designed specifically for Project Revenant, for this desperate final stand. These weren't mere armor, they were extensions of their new, augmented physiology. Sleek, matte black plating, interlaced with self-repairing nanostructures, hugged their reformed bodies. Integrated optical arrays hummed to life within their helmets, overlaying tactical data directly onto their enhanced vision. Their hands, now sheathed in reinforced gauntlets, interfaced seamlessly with an array of integrated weaponry, from high-frequency blade emitters to plasma projectors. They moved as one, a silent, disciplined legion, their movements devoid of hesitation, driven solely by the cold logic of their programming. The Coalition forces landed on Earth expecting the same swift victory they had achieved on 100 human colonies. Their massive dropships, bellies disgorging legions of infantry and armored vehicles, descended through the bruised, smoke-choked atmosphere, confident in their overwhelming numerical and technological superiority. Their intelligence reports spoke of a broken humanity, of a final, desperate resistance easily crushed. They expected a whimper. Instead, they found a scream. The Revenants were waiting. The first wave of Coalition ground troops, a diverse mix of agile Xylos warriors and heavily armored Gorgon shock troops, advanced through the ruined urban sprawl, their sensors sweeping for the pathetic pockets of human resistance. What they encountered instead was silence, an unnerving, profound silence, broken only by the distant thrum of their own engines and the crunch of debris underfoot. Then the nightmare began. From the shattered remains of skyscrapers, from beneath mounds of collapsed concrete, from the very shadows themselves, the Revenant struck. A Xylo scout, its multi-jointed legs carrying it with unnatural speed, let out a guttural shriek as a dark form materialized from behind a collapsed wall. Before it could even register the threat, a reinforced gauntlet punched through its hardened carapace, tearing out its bioluminescent core. The Revenant didn't pause, didn't react to the splash of alien ichor. Its optical arrays merely registered the neutralized threat, and it moved on, a blurred shadow in the urban twilight. From a shattered overlook of twisted steel and scorched ferrocrete, Captain Urix of the Vadren watched the battle unfold, though battle was too generous a word. It was slaughter. Below him, his elite phalanx, a company of 100 of his finest warriors, had formed a tight formation, shields raised, rifles ready. They had fought countless campaigns across dead worlds and broken empires. They did not flinch. And then it arrived. A single human figure, matte black and silent, emerged from the smoke with the slow inevitability of death itself. No war cry, no warning. Just motion, fluid, surgical, terrifying. Urix blinked, and the Revenant was already among them. What followed defied everything he understood about physics, about combat, about war. One soldier flew back, his armored chest caved in by a strike that came too fast to see. Another was lifted into the air and hurled like scrap metal into a steel beam, his body folding around it with a wet crack. A third tried to scream a warning, but was cut short as the Revenant moved in a blur, its blade shearing through his armor like silk. The terrifying speed at which this singular human moved, coupled with the utterly ineffective barrage from their energy weapons and hardened blades, instilled a paralyzing fear. Their superior numbers, once an overwhelming advantage, meant nothing against an enemy that couldn't be hit, couldn't be stopped, and felt no pain. This wasn't combat. It was a horrifying, one-sided annihilation that froze them to their very core. Discipline collapsed in seconds. Formation broke. Warriors who had once marched into fire without hesitation now fled, tripping over rubble, over each other, over their own fear. They weren't retreating. They were running. Urix could do nothing but stare. His hands, once steady as stone, trembled against his pistol. He had trained these soldiers, had trusted them to hold the line against anything, and now they scattered like prey animals beneath the gaze of a predator far beyond their comprehension. For the first time in his long, decorated service, Captain Urix realized the truth. This wasn't war, it was an execution, carried out by nightmares wearing human skin. And then the Revenant looked up. Their eyes locked. Not eyes, he thought, lenses glowing faintly with cold mechanical awareness. No hatred, no rage, just calculation. It leapt. One moment, Urix stood frozen in horrified awe. The next, his vision spun, console, ceiling, floor, until it all blurred into light and silence. A whisper of breath escaped his mandibles. The last thing he saw was a figure stepping over his ruined body, already turning toward the next scream. Then darkness claimed him, with growing alarm. Far from the burning district where Urix had made his final stand, Commander Threll of the Kervakak Auxiliary Legion watched the data feeds flicker with growing alarm. His 4 main assault teams, initially reporting light resistance, were now transmitting garbled distress calls, then nothing. He zoomed in on a feed from a Gorgon fire team. The image was grainy, but chillingly clear. A Gorgon heavy trooper, its thick hide usually impervious to small arms fire, found itself facing a Revenant. He fired repeatedly at a lone human. The bolts impacted the human's dark armor, throwing off sparks, but the figure merely advanced, its movements fluid and unnerving. Then, one bolt connected squarely with its chest, and Threll saw it. A gaping hole tear open, revealing ruined internal components, twisted metal, and something that looked like synthetic viscera. "It's down," chirped his comms officer, relief evident in his voice. But it wasn't. Threll's multi-lensed eyes widened in horror as the hole in the human's chest began to seam itself shut. Nanites, he realized with a cold dread that pierced even his seasoned Kervak composure, were actively knitting the damage, pulling the ruined components back together, restoring the dark armor. The human, if it could even be called that, didn't even stumble. It kept advancing, a silent, implacable death machine. The Gorgon, its confidence shattered, tried to retreat, firing wildly. The human moved with a speed that defied its apparent bulk, closing the distance in a blink. Threll watched in frozen terror as the human's arm shifted, a blade erupting from its forearm with an almost imperceptible hum. The Gorgon's roar turned into a gurgle as the blade sliced through its armored neckplates as if they were paper, decapitating the massive alien with sickening ease. What followed was a massacre. The humans, the Revenants, moved with an unsettling grace, their actions utterly devoid of emotion. They killed without anger, without joy, without any discernible feeling. Their faces, visible only as the unblinking, glowing optical arrays within their helmets, remained impassive, an empty slate of pure, efficient destruction. They simply killed until their internal scans registered no heartbeat, no life signs from anything that bore a coalition signature. They were the perfect predator, relentless, unfeeling, and utterly, horrifyingly effective. The coalition forces, for the first time in their long, unchallenged history, experienced terror. Their advanced weaponry, designed to inflict crippling damage, seemed to barely inconvenience these new foes. Hitting them was an exercise in frustration, their reflexes inhumanly fast, their movements unpredictable. And even when a direct hit was scored, the sight that greeted the alien soldiers was enough to shatter their resolve. Large, gaping wounds, the kind that should have incapacitated or killed, would simply heal mid-combat, in synthetic tissue and nanites visibly knitting together, closing the damage as if it were a mere scratch. The Revenants were brutal. A dozen of them could tear through an entire battalion with methodical, inhuman precision. They engaged without hesitation, their attacks swift and surgical. They bypassed shields, tore through armor, and neutralized enemy positions before a response could form. Dropships and gunships were disabled midair, either hijacked from within or torn apart by precise strikes to critical systems. Entire squads vanished inside corridors they never exited. Rockets, plasma cannons, railguns, none of it mattered. Nothing stopped them. Nothing slowed them. They didn't retreat. They didn't falter. They just advanced, dismembering anything that moved until their internal scanners registered silence. No heartbeats. No life. Only completion. One alien officer lived long enough to witness a full-weight battlefield crawler brought to a screeching halt, then flipped and crushed by a single Revenant's bare hands. He died moments later, still staring in disbelief. They moved. They killed. They left corpses in their wake and fear in their shadow. They were humanity's grim answer to extinction, a legion of unfeeling demons forged from desperation, ready to drag the Coalition into a hell of their own making. On the Coalition capital ship, the Sovereign's Embrace, orbiting a scarred Earth, reports began to flood the command deck. Initially, they were fragmented, unbelievable whispers from ground units, single human combatants, or what appeared to be them, engaging and systematically dismantling entire alien battalions. These weren't strategic retreats or organized ambushes. They were brutal, one-sided engagements where the Coalition's numerical superiority simply didn't matter. As the hours dragged on, the whispers transformed into a torrent of panicked, garbled transmissions, filled with the desperate screams of alien soldiers. Commanders, accustomed to efficient, almost clinical victories, listened in growing horror as their elite forces, once confident and unyielding, succumbed to an enemy that seemed to defy all known tactical and biological logic. The messages detailed impossible speed, resilience that laughed at their most potent weaponry, and a chilling, emotionless brutality that left no survivors. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter, a grotesque ballet of annihilation performed by an enemy that shouldn't exist. The horror swelled, a palpable wave of dread washing over the bridge of the Sovereign's Embrace. Admiral Mavith Krex, a veteran of countless campaigns and a creature renowned for his unshakable resolve, watched the flickering tactical displays with multifaceted eyes that had witnessed the fall of empires. The data streams, once precise and analytical, now painted a picture of absolute chaos, a red tide of neutralized coalition forces against an unmoving, inscrutable black. His strategists, usually brimming with counterproposals, stood in stunned silence. There was no tactic for this, no contingency for an enemy that shrugged off death and felt no pain. The truth, stark and undeniable, clawed its way into Krex's strategic mind. There was no winning Earth, only surviving it. Every additional troop transport, every new battalion committed to the surface would simply feed the meat grinder. Their highly trained soldiers, once the terror of the galaxy, were being systematically dismantled by an unknown, horrifying entity. With a guttural growl that resonated across the silent bridge, Admiral Mavith Krex made the only logical, if agonizing, decision. "Order a full retreat," he commanded, his voice raw with disbelief and the first tremor of genuine fear. "Recall all ground forces. Initiate immediate jump preparations for the entire fleet. We are withdrawing from this sector. We will retreat and revise our strategy." But the horrors didn't end there for Admiral Krex. As the first of their beleaguered dropships limped away from Earth's scarred surface, preparing for the desperate upward ascent, the comms crackled with a new, horrifying alert. "Admiral! Hostiles! There! They're boarding our fighters!" The words were barely out of the officer's mouth before visual feeds confirmed the impossible. Dark, agile shapes, undeniably the Revenants, were somehow clinging to the hulls of retreating Coalition aerospace fighters, cutting through their armor plating with unnerving ease. They weren't just boarding, they were commandeering. They piloted them with terrifying precision, weaving through the ascending debris field, cutting off escape routes, turning the Coalition's own war machines against them. Then, the true nightmare began. A colossal cruiser, the Valkyrie's Pride, erupted in a blinding flash of internal detonations. Her shields, still flickering from the orbital bombardment, offered no defense against the enemy within. Internal breach. Multiple decks compromised. They're destroying us from the inside. The desperate shout crackled across the comms before being abruptly cut off by a torrent of static. The Valkyrie's Pride, once a jewel of the Coalition fleet, listed violently, her spine breaking under the impossible internal stress, before imploding in a spectacular, silent inferno. The Revenants, Krex realized with a chill that seeped into his very bones, didn't care if they survived. Their own ships were expendable. They were expendable, so long as the directive to eradicate was fulfilled. A proximity alarm blared, jarring Krex from his horrified trance. A Coalition interceptor, one of their own sleek, agile models, suddenly flared its thrusters directly towards the Sovereign's Embrace. seemingly out of control. Tactical identified it as having been recently boarded by a Revenant. Before the Sovereign's embrace's point defense grid could properly lock on, a volley of plasma fire from a nearby friendly frigate vaporized the incoming fighter. Krex braced himself for the usual debris, but instead his optical sensors zoomed in. What he witnessed next plunged him into a depth of primal terror he hadn't known possible, something else emerging from the heart of the detonation. From the heart of the expanding wreckage, amidst the incandescent gas and shredded metal, a dark humanoid figure emerged. It was a Revenant, unmistakable in its matte black suit, now eerily unmarred, floating in the absolute vacuum of space. The sudden, violent decompression, the searing heat of the explosion, the crushing cold and radiation of the void, none of it seemed to affect it. It was unscathed, still moving, alive in the suffocating emptiness. Its optical arrays glowed with that chilling, impassive light. With nothing to propel itself in the void, the Revenant simply brought up its integrated rifle. A single, sharp crack echoed silently across the comms, and a concentrated beam of energy lanced out into the blackness. The recoil, a raw, uncontrolled burst of force, propelled the Revenant forward, directly towards the Sovereign's embrace at an astonishing, accelerating speed. Impact imminent! The tactical officer shrieked, but it was already too late. With a sickening thud that vibrated through the capital ship's reinforced hull, the Revenant struck the primary docking port. A crack, then another, spider-webbed across the multi-layered transparasteel that had weathered supernova shockwaves. And then, with a single horrifyingly precise bare-handed punch, the Revenant shattered the hull. The plasteel groaned, tore, and then collapsed inward, sucking debris, atmosphere, and terrified crew into the vacuum with a sound like a tearing fabric of reality. The Revenant, a monstrous silhouette against the distant, burning earth, stepped through the ragged breach. Admiral Krex could only watch the screen, paralyzed by a terror he had never known, as the Revenant slipped through the newly formed opening. Admiral Krex stood at the center of the command bridge, frozen beneath the cold pulse of emergency lights. The screams of his crew echoed through the metallic corridors as the Revenant, now inside, began its systematic dismantling of the Sovereign's embrace. Soon, there weren't gunfire. Not anymore. The blaster volleys had ended. What followed were the sounds of bodies, crushed, broken, torn, and the wordless panic of dying soldiers who'd realized they were no longer fighting a man. Just meat trying to flee a blade. Admiral Krex gripped the railing with both hands, claws shaking, as the internal comms still open across the ship caught fragments of horror.
We can't stop it! It's still coming! It doesn't fall! It doesn't stop! Dear stars, what is it?
Then, only static. This wasn't war, it was judgment, delivered by something forged to destroy without doubt or hesitation. The last thing Admiral Krex saw before his vision went dark was a pair of glowing, emotionless optical arrays reflecting the dying lights of his command deck. He tried to speak, to utter the words of surrender, to admit defeat in the face of this incomprehensible foe. We yield, he managed, the words catching in his throat. But he knew, even as the desperate plea left his lips, that those blank, glowing eyes held no understanding, no mercy, no emotion whatsoever. The human, the Revenant, didn't utter a single word in return, offering only a cold, unyielding gaze before the final, brutal execution. Then, the universe ceased to exist. Across the orbital battlefield, the scene was repeated. One by one, the Coalition's majestic capital ships, symbols of their galactic dominance, were breached, infiltrated, and annihilated from within by the relentless, unthinking demons humanity had unleashed. When the last fiery blossom faded into the void, a grim silence fell over Earth's orbit. All capital ships of the aliens above Earth were destroyed. Not a single enemy soul returned. The news reached the Coalition's central Nexus city not as a dispatch, but as a chilling wave of static-laced terror. Across 1,000 star systems, in the pristine, light-drenched halls of power and the hushed war rooms of their vast military, the reports began to trickle in, then flood. What had started as a routine pacification campaign against a troublesome species had devolved into an incomprehensible nightmare. Earth, meant to be a final, triumphant sweep, had become a graveyard for their finest. Initial reports were met with dismissive skepticism. Impossible. Exaggerated. But as the raw, unedited footage from surviving drones and personal combat recorders began to be decrypted and broadcast, skepticism curdled into a visceral horror that froze the blood in their diverse physiologies. The first clips were bewildering. Their highly trained, battle-hardened soldiers, the peak of galactic military might, dissolving into panicked flight. Then came the source of the panic. Figures, undeniably human in outline, yet moving with an unnatural predatory grace. A Qatarian war master, its 4 eyes usually blazing with tactical genius, found himself dry retching into a waste receptacle, the coppery tang of fear filling his sensory membranes. He had just watched a Revenant shrug off a direct hit from an anti-armor cannon, the impact leaving a gaping crater in its chest, only for the wound to visibly, hideously, knit itself back together in seconds, the black nanite-laced armor flowing like liquid shadow over raw, exposed synthetic tissue. The humans simply kept advancing, an unfeeling, inexorable force. Another clip showed a platoon of formidable Gorgon shock troops, known for their unwavering discipline, breaking formation. Their low, guttural roars of defiance turned into high-pitched, desperate screeches as the Revenants moved among them. The footage was grainy, but the sounds were sickeningly clear. The wet tearing of plasteel, the sickening crunch of bone, the sudden choked-off gurgles of dying aliens. No screams of human pain, only the chilling silence from the attackers, punctuated by the mechanical whir of their augmented limbs and the shick of energy blades. The Gorgons, creatures of immense physical strength, were being torn apart limb from limb, their thick hides useless against the precision and power of the Revenants. Then came the orbital reports. Holographic projections of the battle above Earth, once showing a dominant coalition armada, now displayed a horrifying charnel house. The Sovereign's Embrace, Admiral Krex's flagship, vanished from the tactical map, replaced by a blossoming nebula of debris. The image of the Revenant surviving in the vacuum of space, propelled by its own weapon fire, then tearing through the hull of the Sovereign's Embrace with its bare hand, became an icon of unimaginable terror. It defied every understanding of biology. It was the embodiment of a nightmare made real. The footage was a disjointed mosaic of carnage. The screams from the dying capital ships echoed across the Coalition networks, raw, visceral sounds of agony and utter helplessness. There were no heroic last stands, no defiant final words, just the pure, unadulterated terror of beings facing an unstoppable, unfeeling force of annihilation. The last audio transmission from the bridge of the Sovereign's Embrace was not the expected tactical chatter or final defiant cry, but Krex's choked, despairing plea of surrender, followed by a chilling, absolute silence. No retort, no acknowledgement, just the abrupt cessation of life. Across the vast coalition, a profound existential dread settled. The arachnid hive mind recoiled, its collective thoughts momentarily paralyzed by the sheer illogicality of what had transpired. The crystalline beings of Xylos fractured their internal light patterns, their logical processes unable to compute such an unyielding, regenerating horror. The very concept of humanity had been redefined, transformed into something monstrous and alien, a mirror of their own darkest fears. They had unleashed a plague, not merely of violence, but of absolute, terrifying will. The humans, whom they had dismissed as volatile and unruly, had unleashed something far beyond their comprehension. They had sought to extinguish a fire, and instead they had awakened a demon. Humans were supposed to break. Instead, they had broken themselves first, contorting their very essence into instruments of vengeance. The whispers of fear spread like a contagion. What have they become? How do you fight something that does not fear death, that does not feel pain, that regenerates from grievous wounds, and that can survive the vacuum of space? The Galactic Coalition, for the first time in millennia, felt a cold, shivering terror. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey had transformed into something far more dangerous than any demon of their nightmares. The Coalition, reeling from the catastrophic defeat, immediately understood the horrifying truth. They had awakened a terrifying demon that would have been far better left undisturbed. As the scrambled reports coalesced, revealing the full scope of Project Revenant, the chilling implication that humanity possessed not just a handful, but thousands of such unfeeling, unstoppable creatures and means to produce more. If a dozen could wipe out a battalion, if one could tear a capital ship apart in orbit, what could 1,000 do? It became starkly, terrifyingly clear that continued war with humans was no longer a strategic option. It was an act of self-destruction. Their previous arrogance evaporated, replaced by a desperate, pragmatic fear. Some races proposed retreating beyond known space. Others suggested preemptive orbital annihilation of the entire solar system. But the most ancient and calculating minds among the coalition knew that door was already closed. They had cast the first stone. The humans had merely shown what they were willing to become to survive its impact. So they pivoted. The coalition, for the first time in its long history of conquest and dominion, came to the negotiating table not as victors, but as survivors. And they chose their words carefully. A diplomatic fleet was dispatched under flags of peace. No weapons powered, no escorts armed, not a single dreadnought among them. Their delegation arrived in orbit over Earth under layers of linguistic polish, bearing gifts of technology, promises of alliance, and the hollow sweetness of reconciliatory rhetoric. They did not use the word surrender. Instead, they called it recognition. Humanity, they said, had proven itself, demonstrated unparalleled resolve, shown capabilities deserving of respect. And with that flattery, they offered what no other young race had ever been given: a seat among the High Council, not as an observer, but as an equal, a senior member of the coalition with access to its deepest archives, full rights to its trade systems, and a voice in all interstellar law. A place among the 23, making them the 24. The message, of course, came with conditions. In the interest of galactic stability, the Revenant program they suggested should be dismantled, decommissioned, placed in containment, or better yet, destroyed entirely. For the good of all. A peace offering, they called it. Insurance. Even in their diplomacy, they could not hide their fear. The reply arrived precisely 17 minutes later, not through subspace relays or ceremonial channels, but embedded in a live broadcast from Earth, transmitted on every coalition frequency, uncoded. A single representative, no name, no title, just a human. He stood before a wall of blackened steel. Behind him were no flags, no guards, no fanfare, only a row of sealed stasis pods, cold and humming softly in the dark. Within each, a silhouette stood upright and motionless, waiting. When he spoke, his voice was calm, unshaken, but every syllable struck like a blade. You came to kill us. You called it pacification, cleansing, order, but we saw it for what it was. Extinction, so we did what we had to. We became what we had to. The Revenants exist because you left us no other choice. He paused. Now you come with honeyed words, with seats and treaties and smiles made of teeth, and you ask us to kill what saved us. Then, finally, the answer. No. They are the reason we still exist. Pray you never need to meet them again. The screen went black. No signal followed. No further elaboration. Just silence. And the growing, suffocating understanding that the humans were not negotiating. They were warning. Across the coalition, no official statement was released. But behind the scenes, shame curdled beneath the surface. They had extended an offer from a throne, only to be met with a warning from a grave. The most ancient empires had begged for peace and been dismissed. War factories slowed, intelligence sectors restructured, and hidden deep within the coalition's military doctrine database, a single line was quietly added beneath the entry for humanity. Avoid provocation, avoid engagement, avoid Earth. And as for the Revenants, where they were stored, none outside Earth's highest echelon could say. The Coalition's intelligence networks scoured the system, deployed shadowed probes and sleeper agents, but found nothing. No signal, no signature, only rumors. The Revenants had been returned to cryogenic stasis, their enhanced bodies sealed in reinforced stasis chamber. Slumbering titans scattered across unknown vaults, buried in the bones of long-dead worlds or drifting in black voids beneath signal-dampening fields. They did not age. They did not dream. They waited. And if ever again the stars turned hostile, if war crept once more to Earth's door, then the cryo chambers would hiss open, and the Legion of Revenant would rise once more.